Jake Morrison woke up with a splitting headache and the taste of metal in his mouth. The last thing he remembered was running diagnostics on his supply shuttle when everything went dark. Now he found himself lying on a cold, smooth floor that seemed to glow with a faint blue light. He sat up slowly and looked around. The room was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls curved in impossible ways, and there were no visible seams or joints anywhere. Everything looked grown rather than built, like the inside of some giant shell. The air smelled strange too, like ozone mixed with something sweet and organic. Jake was a maintenance engineer on the colony ship New Frontier. He had been making a routine supply run to gather materials from an asteroid field when his shuttle's systems suddenly failed. He remembered seeing a massive shadow pass over his ship before everything went black. The room he was in now had no windows, but there was a section of wall that looked different from the rest. It was more transparent, like looking through thick glass or crystal. Jake walked over to it and pressed his hand against the surface. It was warm and seemed to pulse slightly under his touch. Beyond the transparent wall, he could see movement. Shapes that were definitely not human were walking, back and forth. They were tall and thin with too many joints in their arms and legs. Their heads were elongated and seemed to have multiple eyes. When they moved, it was with a strange clicking sound that echoed through the walls. Jake had never seen an alien before, but he was pretty sure that was what these creatures were. The colony ship New Frontier had been exploring space for 3 years, and they had found plenty of planets with life, but nothing intelligent, until now. One of the creatures stopped in front of the transparent wall and looked directly at Jake. It had 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows across its face, and they all blinked at different times. The creature's mouth moved, and Jake heard a series of clicks and whistles that might have been speech. Suddenly, a voice spoke inside Jake's head. It was not his own voice, and it sounded mechanical and flat. Human specimen is conscious. Beginning preliminary assessment. Jake jumped back from the wall. What the hell, who said that? The voice spoke again. Translation matrix activated. Human language patterns identified. Communication now possible. The alien creature beyond the wall clicked and whistled again, and this time, Jake heard the translated words. Subject shows expected surprise response. Stress indicators within normal ranges for newly captured specimens. Captured? Jake said out loud. Look, I think there's been some kind of mistake here. I'm not looking for trouble. I was just collecting supplies for my ship. The alien tilted, its head in a way that reminded Jake of a bird studying a worm. Human demonstrates vocal communication ability. Intelligence level appears adequate for testing protocols. More aliens appeared beyond the wall. They all looked similar, but Jake could see slight differences in their size and the patterns on their skin. They seemed to be discussing something, their clicks and whistles creating a constant chatter that the translator could not keep up with. One alien was larger than the others and had more elaborate markings on its elongated head. When it spoke, the others fell silent. I am Research Commander Zix Thala of the Vorthak research vessel Kethvar. You are the first of your species that we have encountered. We require information about your biological and psychological characteristics. Jake tried to stay calm. His military training had taught him that panic was usually the worst thing you could do in a crisis. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm from the human colony ship New Frontier. We're explorers just like you seem to be. Maybe we can work something out here. Your cooperation is not required, Zix Thala replied. Our procedures are designed to gather necessary data regardless of subject compliance. However, voluntary participation may reduce discomfort levels. Another alien stepped forward. This one was smaller and had different colored markings. I am Dr. Velkara, xenobiologist for this expedition. Your species presents several interesting anomalies. Your home planet's atmospheric composition suggests an environment that should be toxic to most life forms. Jake frowned. Earth? There's nothing wrong with Earth's air. I mean, sure, some cities have smog problems, but people live just fine. The aliens exchanged what Jake assumed were surprised looks, though it was hard to tell with their alien faces. Your planet's nitrogen-oxygen mixture contains significant levels of industrial pollutants, volcanic gases, and organic decay compounds, Dr. Velcara said. Our analysis indicates these levels should cause immediate respiratory distress in sentient species. Well, they don't bother us, Jake said with a shrug. Humans are pretty tough, I guess. Commander Zixathala made a note on a device that looked like a cross between a tablet and a piece of coral. Subject demonstrates either ignorance of environmental hazards or unusual tolerance for toxic conditions. Further testing required. Jake did not like the sound of that. What kind of testing? Standard psychological evaluation protocols, the commander replied. We must understand how your species responds to various stimuli before we can determine your threat level to the Galactic Collective. Galactic Collective? Jake asked, but the aliens were already moving away from the transparent wall. Dr. Velcara was the last to leave. She looked back at Jake with her multiple eyes. Rest while you can, human. Testing begins soon. Try not to be too afraid. Fear responses provide the most accurate data. Jake watched them disappear from view, leaving him alone in the strange, glowing room. He sat down on the floor and tried to think. He was obviously in some kind of alien spaceship, captured by creatures who wanted to run experiments on him. The situation was definitely not good, but Jake had grown up in Detroit, where you learned early that showing fear was often worse than whatever you were afraid of. He had survived gang fights, factory accidents, and 3 tours of duty in the Colonial Marines before joining the New Frontier as a civilian engineer. Whatever these aliens had planned for him, Jake figured he could handle it. After all, how bad could alien psychology tests be? Jake had been sitting in the glowing room for what felt like hours when the wall suddenly opened. He had not seen any door or opening mechanism, but a section of the curved wall simply melted away like ice in warm water. 3 Vorthak aliens entered, moving with that strange clicking sound their joints made. The largest one was Commander Zixathala, who Jake recognized from before. The other 2 were smaller and carried devices that looked like a mix between medical equipment and weapons. They reminded Jake of the spray tanks that exterminators used back on Earth. Human Jake Morrison, Commander Zixathala said through the translator. You will accompany us to the testing chamber. Do not attempt to resist or flee. Such actions would be both futile and unnecessary. Jake stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible. Where are we going exactly? To determine your species' psychological profile, the commander replied. All sentient species in our database have predictable fear responses. Understanding these responses allows us to classify threat levels and communication strategies. 1 of the smaller aliens stepped forward. Jake could see that this one had different markings on its elongated head. I am testing Supervisor Kelvak. The procedure is standard and has been performed on 47 different species. Compliance. Will reduce the duration of testing. Jake followed them out of the room and through a corridor that curved and twisted in ways that made his head hurt. The walls were the same organic-looking material, and they pulsed with that faint blue light. The air was warm and humid, and it smelled like a greenhouse mixed with a chemistry lab. They passed other rooms with transparent walls. Jake caught glimpses of what looked like laboratories filled with strange equipment. In one room, he saw tanks filled with glowing liquid. In another, there were screens showing star charts and planetary data. Everything looked advanced but alien, built by minds that thought differently than humans. The testing chamber was larger than Jake's holding room. The walls were covered with sensors and monitoring equipment that looked like metallic flowers. In the center of the room was a chair that seemed to be grown from the same material as the walls. It had restraints built into the arms and legs. Please, seat yourself, Commander Zixathala said. Jake looked at the chair and then at the 3 aliens. Do I really need to be tied down for a psychology test? The restraints are for your safety, Testing Supervisor Kelvak explained. Some species experience violent reactions during fear response testing. We do not wish you to injure yourself. Jake sat down in the chair. It was surprisingly comfortable and seemed to adjust itself to his body shape. The restraints closed around his wrists and ankles, but they were not tight enough to hurt. They felt more like thick straps than metal shackles. Dr. Velcara entered the chamber carrying a device that looked like a combination of a medical scanner and a camera. She began taking readings, moving the device around Jake's head and chest. Baseline readings established, she announced. Human stress indicators are elevated but within expected parameters for the situation. Heart rate is steady. Brain activity shows alertness without panic responses. Commander Zix Thala moved to a control panel that grew out of the wall like a tree branch. We will now begin the fear response test. The compound we use is called Terror Mist 7. It is a synthesized pheromone mixture that triggers primal fear reactions in all known sentient life forms. Pheromones? Jake asked. Like what insects use to communicate? Correct, Dr. Velcara said, sounding surprised that Jake knew the term. Most intelligent species retain sensitivity to chemical fear signals from their evolutionary past. Terror Mist 7 contains compounds that activate these deep-level responses. Testing Supervisor Kelvak moved to another control panel. The concentration will be gradually increased until we observe the expected reaction. Most species reach compliance levels within 3 minutes of initial exposure. Jake tested the restraints again. They were definitely secure, but not painful. And what exactly is the expected reaction? Overwhelming terror, Commander Zix Thala said matter-of-factly. Subjects typically experience intense fear, loss of rational thought, and strong desire to escape or hide. The response is involuntary and impossible to resist through willpower alone. Sounds unpleasant, Jake said. The effects are temporary, Dr. Velcara assured him. Once the compound is cleared from your system, you will return to normal mental function. However, the fear response provides valuable data about your species' psychological vulnerabilities. Jake nodded. He had been through worse things than being scared by alien gas. During his military service, he had been exposed to tear gas during training. He had also lived through a chemical plant accident in Detroit when he was 12 years old. The whole neighborhood had been evacuated, but not before everyone had breathed in some pretty nasty stuff. Are you ready to begin? Commander Zix Thala asked. Do I have a choice? Jake replied. Not really, the commander admitted. Jake settled back in the chair and tried to relax. Then let's get this over with. Commander Zix Thala touched a control and Jake heard a soft hissing sound. Vents opened in the walls, and a purple-colored gas began to fill the chamber. The aliens stepped back to an observation area behind a transparent barrier. The gas smelled strange. It was not unpleasant exactly, but it was definitely artificial. Jake recognized some of the chemical scents from his years working in industrial areas. There was something that reminded him of the solvent they used to clean engine parts, mixed with something that smelled like the air around the old steel mills back home. Jake took a deep breath and waited for the fear to hit him. The aliens were watching intently, their multiple eyes focused on his face and their devices recording his vital signs. But instead of terror, Jake felt something completely different. The smell was triggering memories of his childhood, walking to school through the industrial district of Detroit. The purple gas smelled like home. Interesting, he said out loud, taking another deep breath. This actually smells familiar. Through the transparent barrier, he could see the aliens exchanging what looked like confused glances. Dr. Velcara was checking her instruments and looking puzzled. Jake closed his eyes and let the gas fill his lungs. It really did smell like the neighborhood where he grew up, where the air was thick with car exhaust, factory emissions, and the smell of oil refineries working around the clock. You know, Jake said with a slight smile, this smells like home. The aliens stared at Jake through the transparent barrier with all their multiple eyes. Dr. Velcara was frantically checking her instruments, tapping them with her long fingers as if they were broken. Testing Supervisor Kelvak was making rapid, clicking sounds that the translator could not keep up with. Commander Zix Thala stepped closer to the barrier. Human, describe your current mental state. Are you experiencing fear, panic, or desire to escape? Jake took another deep breath of the purple gas and actually relaxed further into the chair. His shoulders, which had been tense since his capture, were finally loosening up. Not really. This stuff just reminds me of growing up in Detroit, my neighborhood always smelled like this. Impossible, Dr. Velkera said, her voice coming through the translator with what sounded like disbelief. Terror Mist 7 contains concentrated fear pheromones. No known species can resist its effects. Jake opened his eyes and looked at the aliens. Well, I guess humans are different. This gas smells like the air around the Ford plant where my dad worked, and the chemical factory down the street from our house, and the oil refinery by the river. He paused, thinking about his childhood. You know, when I was a kid, we used to play in the vacant lots near the factories. The air was always thick with stuff like this. My mom used to say that Detroit kids had the strongest lungs in America because we grew up breathing everything. Testing. Supervisor Kelvak adjusted something on his control panel. Increasing concentration to level 5. This should overcome any natural resistance. The hissing sound got louder, and more purple gas poured into the chamber. The color became so thick that Jake could barely see the aliens through the barrier. But instead of making him afraid, it just made him more comfortable. Yeah, this is definitely like home, Jake said with a small smile. Reminds me of summer days when the wind would blow from the industrial district. We called it the smell of money because it meant people had jobs. Dr. Velkara was now making rapid notes on her device. Subject shows decreased stress indicators rather than increased ones. Heart rate is actually slowing down. Brain activity suggests relaxation instead of panic. Jake started talking, partly to fill the silence, and partly because the familiar smell was making him nostalgic. I remember my first day at the auto plant after I got out of the military. The supervisor took us new guys on a tour of the factory floor. The air was full of metal dust, paint fumes, welding smoke, and rubber from the tire assembly line. He chuckled at the memory. The supervisor asked if anyone felt sick or dizzy. 3 guys from the suburbs had to sit down, but us Detroit kids were fine. We told him it just smelled like home. Commander Zixthala was having a heated discussion with the other aliens. Jake could hear their clicking and whistling getting faster and more urgent, even though the translator was not picking up most of it. My grandmother had a little house right next to the steel mill, Jake continued. Every morning the air would be thick with iron dust and coal smoke. She used to make breakfast with the windows open and the smell would mix with bacon and coffee. Best breakfast of my life, Dr. Velkara interrupted her note-taking. Human Jake Morrison, are you experiencing any negative effects from the gas? Difficulty breathing, increased heart rate, sweating, trembling? Jake thought about it seriously. No, nothing like that. If anything, I feel more relaxed than I have since you guys grabbed me. This smell takes me back to when I was a kid and didn't have to worry about being captured by aliens. Testing Supervisor Kelvak increased the concentration again. Level 7. This concentration has never failed to produce complete panic response. The chamber was now so full of purple gas that Jake could not see the aliens at all. But he just breathed normally and kept talking. I worked construction for a while before joining the Colonial Marines. We were building a new chemical plant on the east side. The air around that job site was thick with concrete dust, diesel fumes, and chemicals from the old plant next door. Guys from other cities would show up wearing masks and filters. Jake laughed. But the Detroit crew would just light up cigarettes and get to work. The foreman used to joke that we were too polluted to be poisoned. Through the thick gas, he could hear the aliens having what sounded like an argument. Their clicking and whistling was getting very agitated. I remember when they built the new waste treatment plant near my high school, Jake said. The whole neighborhood smelled like sulfur and industrial cleaner for months. Parents from the suburbs were calling the city to complain, but us locals barely noticed. We figured it was better than the old plant that used to leak. Dr. Velkara's voice came through the translator, sounding stressed. Commander, the human's biological readings are completely contrary to expected results. Instead of fear chemicals, his brain is producing relaxation hormones. His blood pressure is actually decreasing. Jake nodded, even though they probably could not see him through the gas. That makes sense. This stuff really does smell like home, like safety, like the place where I grew up and learned how to handle whatever life threw at me. Commander Zixathala's voice was tight with what might have been frustration. Increase to maximum concentration. Level 10. No organic being can resist Terror Mist 7 at full strength. The hissing sound became a roar, and the chamber filled with so much purple gas that Jake felt like he was sitting inside a cloud. But it still just smelled like Detroit on a summer day when the wind was blowing from the factories. "You know what this reminds me of most?" Jake said, his voice echoing strangely in the gas-filled chamber. "The day I left Earth to join the new Frontier colony ship. I stood on the observation deck and took one last breath of home air. It smelled just like this." He took a deep breath and sighed contentedly. "I thought I might never smell home again." Thanks for the memory, guys. In the observation area, the three aliens stood in complete silence, staring at their instruments in what Jake was pretty sure was shock. The purple gas began to clear from the chamber as the ventilation system activated. Jake could see the three aliens again through the transparent barrier, and they all looked like they had seen a ghost. Dr. Velcara was staring at her instruments, with her multiple eyes blinking in different patterns. Testing supervisor Kelvak was making quiet clicking sounds that sounded almost like whimpering. Commander Zixthala was the first to speak. "Shut down the gas release. Begin atmospheric purge immediately." "But Commander," testing supervisor Kelvak protested, "we have not achieved the expected results. Perhaps we should try a different compound." "No," the commander said firmly. "Something is very wrong here. Either our equipment is malfunctioning, or this human is unlike any species we have encountered." As the last of the purple gas was sucked out of the chamber, Jake stretched in his chair and smiled at the aliens. "That was actually pretty relaxing. Do you guys have any more of that stuff? It might help me sleep better." Dr. Velcara dropped her scanning device. It clattered on the floor with a sound like breaking crystal. "Commander, I request permission to access the long-range sensor data about the human home planet." "Granted," Commander Zixthala replied. "Transfer all available data to the main screen." A large display screen grew out of the wall like a flowering plant. Jake could see images of Earth from space with its blue oceans and white clouds. It looked beautiful and peaceful from that distance. "According to our sensors," Dr. Velcara said, reading from her data, "the human home planet has an atmosphere that is 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and 1% other gases." "That seems normal," testing supervisor Kelvak said. "Wait," Dr. Velcara continued. "There are significant additional readings. Large concentrations of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and various industrial compounds. These levels should be toxic to most life forms." Jake listened with interest. "You're talking about pollution, right?" "Yeah. Earth has some pollution problems, especially in the big cities and industrial areas. But it's not that bad." Commander Zixthala studied the data. "Human, these readings indicate that your planet's air contains chemicals that would cause immediate respiratory failure in most galactic species. How do you survive in such an environment?" Jake shrugged as much as the restraints would allow. "We grew up with it, I guess. Humans are pretty tough. We adapt to things." Dr. Velcara pulled up more data. "The sensor readings show that some areas of your planet have air quality that matches the composition of our Terror Mist 7. In fact, our fear gas contains many of the same compounds that your species breathes naturally. That explains why it smelled like home," Jake said. "Detroit air has always been pretty thick. My grandfather used to say that Detroit kids didn't need gas masks because we were born wearing them." The aliens exchanged looks that Jake was starting to recognize as their version of worried expressions. "Show me more data about their planet," Commander Zixthala ordered. The screen filled with information that made the aliens click and whistle in what sounded like distress. Jake could see weather reports showing massive storms, earthquake data, volcanic activity, and temperature ranges that went from far below freezing to extremely hot. "Your planet experiences regular natural disasters," Dr. Velcara said, her voice sounding strange through the translator. "Earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanic eruptions, ice storms, floods, droughts, and extreme temperature variations." "Yeah, Earth weather can be pretty rough," Jake agreed. "But that's just normal life. You learn to deal with it." Testing supervisor Kelvak was studying his own data pad. According to this information, humans regularly expose themselves to conditions that would be considered extreme hazards by galactic safety standards. They participate in activities called extreme sports that involve deliberately placing themselves in dangerous situations. Jake grinned. You mean like mountain climbing, skydiving, deep sea diving, racing cars? That stuff is fun. Good way to spend a weekend. Fun? Commander Zixthala repeated the word like it was foreign to him. Sure, Jake said. Life's too short to play it safe all the time. Besides, a little danger keeps you sharp. Dr. Velkara was now pulling up biological data about humans. Their physical specifications are equally disturbing. They can survive in temperature ranges that span over 100 degrees. They can function with limited oxygen, heal from injuries that would be fatal to most species, and adapt to radiation, levels that would sterilize most planets. Humans are also persistence hunters, Jake added helpfully. We used to chase animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. Most predators give up after a short chase, but humans just keep going. We're like the galaxy's most annoying alarm clock. We never stop ringing. The three aliens were now huddled together, clicking and whistling in rapid conversations that the translator could not follow. Jake caught fragments like death world and impossible survival parameters and extreme adaptation levels. Finally, Commander Zixthala turned back to Jake. Human, what you are describing suggests that your species evolved on what we would classify as a Class 12 death world. Such planets are considered uninhabitable by all known galactic civilizations. Death world? Jake asked. That seems a little dramatic. Sure, Earth can be dangerous, but that's what makes it interesting. Besides, humans don't just survive on Earth. We thrive there. We've got cities with millions of people. We've built machines that can fly through the air and dive to the bottom of the oceans. Dr. Velkara was still reading data. Commander, their industrial activities have actually made their planet more toxic over time, and their population has continued to increase. They appear to be improving their survival capabilities by making their environment more dangerous. Jake nodded. We call that progress. Though I guess when you put it that way, it does sound a little crazy. Testing Supervisor Kelvak looked up from his instruments. Commander, I am beginning to understand why our fear gas had no effect. If this human grew up breathing compounds similar to Terror Mist 7, then exposure to our psychological weapon would indeed trigger nostalgia rather than terror. Commander Zixthala was quiet for a long moment, staring at Jake with all 6 of his eyes. Finally he spoke. Human Jake Morrison, I believe we may have made a serious error in judgment about your species. Commander Zixthala pressed a control, and the restraints around Jake's wrists and ankles opened with a soft click. Jake rubbed his wrists and stood up slowly, stretching muscles that had been held in one position too long. Human Jake Morrison, the commander said, his voice sounding very different through the translator now. I believe we owe you an apology. Jake looked surprised. An apology? For what? We captured you under the assumption that you were a specimen from a primitive species that posed no threat to galactic civilization. We now realize that we may have made the most dangerous mistake in Vorthak history. Dr. Velkara stepped forward, her multiple eyes focused on Jake with what he was starting to recognize as respect rather than scientific curiosity. Your species evolved on a planet that our computers classify as uninhabitable. You breathe air that would kill most galactic citizens. You consider natural disasters to be normal weather. You participate in dangerous activities for entertainment. Jake shrugged. When you put it like that, I guess humans do sound pretty tough, but we're not dangerous. We're actually pretty friendly once you get to know us. Testing Supervisor Kelvak was still staring at his data readings. Commander, according to these biological scans, this human could probably survive on most planets in the galaxy without any protective equipment. Meanwhile, most galactic species would need full environmental suits just to visit his homeworld. That's probably true, Jake said thoughtfully. Humans are pretty adaptable. We've got colonies on planets with all kinds of different environments. Some are colder than Earth, some are hotter, some have thinner air. We just figure out how to make it work. Commander Zixthala began pacing back and forth in front of the testing chamber. We need to contact the Galactic Collective immediately. They must be warned about humanity before any other research vessels attempt to capture your people. Warned? Jake asked. Look, I know this situation got off to a rough start, but humans really aren't looking for trouble. We're explorers just like you. We want to learn about the galaxy and maybe make some friends along the way. Dr. Velkara consulted her datapad. Human, your colony ship contains how many of your species? The New Frontier has about 10,000 colonists aboard, Jake replied. It's one of the smaller colony ships. Earth has sent out dozens of ships like it to explore different parts of the galaxy. The three aliens exchanged looks that Jake was now sure indicated panic. Dozens of ships? Testing supervisor Kelvak's voice cracked through the translator. How many humans are there in total? Jake tried to remember the last population count. He had heard. On Earth? Maybe 8 or 9 billion, plus all the colonies we've established on other planets. Probably around 10 billion humans total and growing pretty fast. Commander Zixthala stopped pacing and stared at Jake. 10 billion Death World survivors spreading across the galaxy in exploration vessels. We prefer to call ourselves humans, Jake said with a smile. And we're not trying to take over anything. We just want to find new places to live and new people to meet. Like you guys. Dr. Velkara was frantically taking notes. Commander, we must consider the implications. If humans consider our most powerful psychological weapon to be nostalgic, what would happen if we tried to use physical force against them? Jake held up his hands peacefully. Hey, there's no need for any violence. I'm sure we can work this out diplomatically. Humans are good at talking through problems. You mentioned that you served in something called Colonial Marines, testing supervisor Kelvak said nervously. Is that a military organization? Yeah, I did 3 tours before becoming a civilian engineer, Jake said. But that was mostly peacekeeping work on the outer colonies, making sure everyone got along and helping with emergencies. Commander Zixthala was clearly trying to process this information. Emergencies on Death Worlds, handled by Death World survivors trained in military tactics. We just call them planets, Jake said patiently. And soldiers, not Death World survivors. Though I guess your way of putting it does sound more dramatic. Dr. Velkara looked up from her notes. Human Jake Morrison, what would your people do if they learned that we had captured and experimented on you? Jake thought about it seriously. Well, they'd probably be pretty upset at first. But if I explained that it was all a misunderstanding, and that you guys were just trying to learn about us, I think they'd calm down. Humans are reasonable people. What if we had harmed you during our experiments? Commander Zixthala asked. That would be more serious, Jake admitted. Humans don't like it when their people get hurt. But even then, we'd probably try to talk it out before doing anything drastic. We'd want to understand why it happened and make sure it didn't happen again. Testing supervisor Kelvak was reading through more data. Commander, I recommend that we return this human to his colony ship immediately and establish formal diplomatic contact with his species. Agreed, Commander Zixthala said quickly. Human Jake Morrison, would you be willing to serve as a liaison between your people and ours, to help establish peaceful relations? Jake grinned. I'd be happy to help. I think humans and Vorthak could be good friends once we get to know each other better. Dr. Velkara was already preparing a new datapad. I would like to request permission to study human adaptation methods, not as test subjects but as research partners. Your species' survival techniques could benefit the entire galaxy. That sounds great, Jake said. I'm sure our scientists would love to share information with you. We could learn a lot from each other. Commander Zixthala moved toward the chamber's exit. Then let us begin immediately. I will order the ship to return to your colony vessel. Perhaps you would join us for a meal while we prepare the diplomatic protocols? Sure, Jake said, following the aliens out of the testing chamber. Just one question, though. Is your food safe for humans to eat? The 3 aliens stopped walking and turned to stare at him with all their eyes. Actually, Dr. Velkara said slowly, I think the better question is whether our food is too weak for human consumption. Jake laughed. Don't worry about it. I'm sure it'll be fine. After all, how dangerous could alien food be? Behind him, he heard testing supervisor Kelvak mutter something that the translator rendered as famous last words from a Death World survivor. But Jake just kept walking, happy to have made some new friends in the galaxy,